Well, I'm definitely excited. I took my visit to Phoenix, and I loved it. Just happy to be a Sun.
I got some Suns news for you guys. According to Woj, the Suns are acquiring Mikal Bridges.
They must really like Bridges then, huh?
I mean, Mikal Bridges, he's an old school type of player.
Welcome to the front office. I am Bobby Marks. I am joined by longtime NBA executive, formerly with the Celtics and the Phoenix Suns, general manager, Ryan McDonough. Ryan, how are you?
Bobby, I'm doing great. It's always good to be on with you. And I guess joining you for this makes me realize how long you and I have been doing this, going back to our Celtics and Nets day. So I remember when I was, the young guy on the block, but now you say long time. And unfortunately, with the gray hairs and, some other signs of aging, I guess that is true. I've been doing this a while.
So I wanted to kind of start off, and we're going to talk about the trade deadline, which is February 10th in a little bit of a while, but kind of about your background. You've got a unique, tremendous background, sports background. Your dad, Will, was a longtime Boston Globe columnist. Your brother, Sean, we know Sean McDonough from he's basically done every sport, I think, whether it be hockey or MLB or college football, the NFL. He's been all over the place. And then your other brother, Terry, has been in the NFL for over 30 years in personnel department. Kind of looking back at being brought up in that type of family, like how has each one kind of influenced you to where you are right now?
Well, it started with our father, who worked for the Boston Globe, basically starting when he was in college at Northeastern, all the way through when he passed in 2003. I think 44 years with the paper. And for your younger viewers and listeners who don't know who Will McDonough was, think of Adrian Wojnarowski, Adam Schefter, some of the top newsbreakers, and really combine those guys across sports. I mean, it's rare now, Bobby. The industry's gotten so big, as you know, but that's what our father really prided himself on, was breaking news, and he broke it in just about every sport locally in Boston and nationally as well. So yeah, when he crossed over to the media side, first with CBS and then with NBC, he was among the first print journalists to make that transition. That really didn't happen in the early to mid 80s. You're either a newspaper guy or a TV guy, and really the paths didn't cross that much in between. So I think just watching him, and we were very fortunate to grow up going to Super Bowls, NFL owners meetings, the Barcelona Olympics. And then Sean is, pioneer, I think, in terms of how young he's done certain things. He was a Red Sox broadcaster locally in New England at 25 years old. He was calling the World Series for CBS with Tim McCarver on national TV at 28 years old. So he's done great there and continues to do it. I won't say how old he is now. He'll get mad at me. But recently, your colleague at ESPN was recently named the lead play-by-play voice for the NHL. So you see him in the playoffs and doing the Stanley Cup, which he's really excited about. And then Terry is kind of the ultimate scout, the ultimate personnel guy. You and I know a lot of guys like that, Bobby, I think in NBA circles. That's what Terry is in the NFL. He's a great player evaluator. He's still working for the Arizona Cardinals. They've had a lot of success over the decade or so he's been with the team.
So you get your start in Boston, 2003. I mean, you've worn a lot of hats there. I mean, special assistant, basketball ops, director of scouting, personnel, eventually assistant GM. I want to kind of start when you got going there in 2003. What do you remember from when you first started with the Celtics?
I remember it felt like I was drinking from a fire hose, and I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, none. And it was an interesting time, Bobby, because you were in Nets for a couple decades. I think a lot of people don't realize when there are high level changes organizationally, some of the pressure and stress that puts on internally with the employees in particular. So when I was hired, a lot of people think I was hired by Danny Ainge. That's actually not the case. I was hired by Wyc Grousbeck and Steve Pagliuca, the Celtics owners, 3 months prior to Danny Ainge getting hired. In fact, I think the first two hires, of the new ownership group, or the new ownership group at the time, led by Grousbeck and Pagliuca, were myself and Daryl Morey, right, way back, 2 decades ago. So I just remember, people being kind of on pins and needles as far as Jim O'Brien and his coaching staff had a lot of success. Chris Wallace and his front office staff, same thing. Then 3 months later, Danny Ainge comes in, new ownership. So that's what I remember. And, it was a kind of a tumultuous time where I think the Celtics were the only team in the league with 3 max contracts, Paul Pierce, Antoine Walker, and Vin Baker. The Vin Baker situation was boiling up. That led to a controversial resolution with the buyout and things like that. And then Antoine Walker was traded in the fall. So I bring all that up because, it's not like I waded into it and had time to get my feet wet and, figure things out for 6 to 12 months. It was like from day one, like, this is the NBA, this is what it's like. And I'd say to any, especially any young men and women who are thinking about getting into it, if you're not ready for that continuous change and prepared to adapt really day to day, hour to hour, then this probably isn't the business for you because, as you know, Bobby, you haven't done it for decades. That's just a way of life in the NBA.
Yeah, I remember my first, when I look back at my Nets, because I started as an intern there, and I did it in PR, is back then we had to cut out newspaper clippings. And what we would do is you'd make copies of it, and then you would give it to all the front office people. It would be like a kind of a packet of, the North Star Ledger or the Bergen Record. And when I started there in the spring, it was the off-season media guide. And I would have to make copies, like 100-page books and stuff. And the copy machine kept on getting jammed, like these old school copy machines. And I'd have to open it up and like you're sticking your hand in there and you're like pulling paper out. Finally, after like the second day, I said, you know what, I'm just going to take this to like Staples and I'm just going to have them do it. And I remember coming back and John Mertz was our head of PR and giving him like the Staples bill for like $1,200 because I didn't want to, and he's like looking at me like, what in the heck are you doing? And like my head was, as you said, like your head is just spinning. You mentioned Danny Ainge. You worked for Danny for a long time there. Danny's now in Utah as their head of basketball operations. Talk to me about your experience working with Danny and what you learned from him.
Well, we had a lot of fun. I mean, he's a very energetic guy, Bobby. He works as hard as any executive in the league. As you know, I mean, a lot of top executives, I don't think people know this, but a lot of top executives don't go out and scout like a scout does, right? They're around the team more, they're in the office more. Maybe they'll go to a college conference tournament or NCAA tournament games, but Danny grinds it. I mean, he's going out, to a game on Tuesday in Stillwater, to watch Oklahoma State, or Starkville to watch Mississippi State. I mean, these are non-glamorous places, but he will go and evaluate players like a scout. So that part really stood out for me. Also, the openness, I think, to new ideas, and it's certainly something that helped my career, is I started video scouting, right? This is before, again, for younger viewers and listeners, probably look at it like we're, old men at this point, but this is before Synergy, before Second Spectrum. I did all that. In fact, when I first started, it was VHS tape. So I'd press play on one VCR and then record on the other. What I didn't realize, Bobby, which, you talk about your Staples story, I had a similarly painful story. I didn't realize on VHS, there's a slight rollback when you stop the tape. So one of my very first experiences in Boston was putting together an edit for the 2003 draft, and think, the great 2003 draft, and now go down as maybe the best of all time with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and others. Well, the problem was when I did the edit, a guy would be going to the basket, he'd shoot a finger roll, and then it would cut to the next clip. And the owners are looking at me like, what did it go in? And I'm sitting there like, your heart drops and you're like, this may be a short tenured thing for me in the NBA, because I didn't realize there was a rollback on the tape and we were under pressure to get it done quickly. So, but that's Danny Ainge. Getting back to Danny Ainge, he's competitive, he's energetic, he's open to new ideas, and he really appreciates work. And I think that's what helped me, because I like you, I didn't play in the NBA. I didn't play basketball beyond high school, but the fact that I would work and grind film, and then, when I got to go out in the field, so to speak, and start scouting, Danny really appreciates and respects that, and that certainly helped my career.
Well, and you can tell by kind of the track record there with players that were drafted, not in a lottery, Rajon Rondo, right? I mean, that's kind of you were there for when that happened. That's a good example of a player that was picked in the, late 20s. You get named GM of the Phoenix Suns in 2013. 2 years later, you draft this shooting guard out of Kentucky named Devin Booker. Not in the top 5, not in the top 10, but with the 13th pick overall. Talk to me a little bit about I know this was about 7 years ago, the process of selecting Devin and kind of what you saw him now and kind of where he is right now.
He was on a loaded Kentucky team. You remember that team went to the Final Four undefeated. They were trying to be the first undefeated team in forever, I think since Indiana back in the 70s. And they were upset by Wisconsin, led by Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker and those guys in the national semifinal. But Devin came off the bench for that team. He and Tyler Ulis were the bench backcourt unit. So I was there in Nashville in 2015. I'd obviously scouted Kentucky throughout the year, watching him in the SEC tournament. Loved his stroke. That was the first thing that stood out. He shot a great ball, but it was a limited role. That's really all he did, catch and shoot. The Harrison twins started for Kentucky in the backcourt, and then Devin came off the bench. And the team was so good that that's all they really needed him to do. So we knew he could shoot it. We thought he'd be in that mid to late lottery range. But what really stood out for us, and this is where I think the process is so important. That's why I'm glad you're doing the show, because people watch players play and they think, okay, well, was that the game or because you saw him in Kentucky? Really, what helped Devin with us in particular, helped us be confident that he was the guy, was the pre-draft process. When we brought him into Phoenix, and his agent, ironically, Leon Rose, who's now running the Knicks, let him compete in a workout. And Devin's competitive nature really stood out in that workout. I mean, 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3. And so we knew he could shoot the ball, and he shot it very well in that workout. But it was more the competitive nature about it, which you now see. And in fact, the drill still stands out. I can close my eyes and envision it to this day, where it's a 1-on-1 knockout drill. You probably know the drill, where the offensive player stays on the court until the defender stops them, and then you rotate offense to defense, and then the defensive player, when he gets a stop, rotates off, and then you kind of go back around in a 1-on-1 drill. Well, nobody could stop Devin, and we were running short on time, so I'm looking at my watch, saying, okay, let's get on to the next thing. And Devin's like, no, and this is a family show, so I won't say what he actually said, but like, no, but bleep that. These guys aren't, these guys better stop me. And for an 18-year-old kid to look at, a GM and a head coach and an owner and all the people around, like, no, we're not doing the next thing. These guys can't stop me. And Josh Richardson and some other good players were in that workout. From what I remember, it's like, well, okay, this guy's not only talented, he's got, something a little bit special, a little bit extra in terms of the competitive juices. So that's what stood out. And then on draft night, he was the 4th Kentucky player taken. I mean, you mentioned he was the 13th pick, but ahead of him in that same draft, which shows you how talented that team was, Karl Anthony Towns went 1, Willie Cauley-Stein went in the mid-lottery, and then the very pick before Devin was his teammate Trey Lyles, went to Utah number 12. So for us, sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you're good. I guess it was a combination of both. On the flip side, sometimes you're unlucky or just screw it up. But that was a relatively easy one. When he was on the board at 13, we had him rated significantly higher, and there was a huge gap from him to the next player on our board. And it's obviously worked out certainly well for me in terms of getting the extension personally with the Suns when I was there, but even better, more importantly for the franchise, which it went to the finals last year, and now as the best record, in my opinion, the best team in the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, you hit a good point. Certainly with Phoenix, how they're playing right now, getting to a finals last year, and then even with the draft process, we see a lot of guys that don't want to compete, right? Like guys that will come in on an individual visit and go 1-on-0 and compete against a chair or a broom, right? And when you can have him play and compete against other players, especially when you have your coaches involved and they're watching, that certainly goes a long way and helps with the process there. I always mention the Kobe Bryant workout when I was in New Jersey, and the rules were totally different. In the late 90s, it was basically like the wild west of draft workouts, where you were allowed to compete against your own players. Like if you had players that had 3 years or less of experience and they wanted to participate, well, they could, Ed O'Bannon and Khalid Reeves, who was drafted in those years, they could compete against Kobe Bryant in a draft workout, and they did, and they got their butts whipped.
I think all of it's important, Bobby, right? The in-person evaluation, the medical, the intel, and then the pre-draft workouts and all that. It's more than anything, from my experience, the guys who are ultra competitive and want to compete, and regardless of what they're being advised by an agent, a friend, a family member, insist on competing, those guys generally tend to do pretty well. 3
years later, Mikal Bridges. You trade the Miami pick, which at the time was like the crown jewel. I remember that 2021 Miami pick, everyone had put so much value on it because it was unprotected and we didn't know where that Heat team was going to turn into it. you move that and the 16th pick overall and move up to number 10 to take Mikal. What do you remember about that night as far as the process there?
I remember I was absolutely exhausted because we had the number 1 pick for the first time in franchise history. Yeah, obviously selected DeAndre Ayton, who's behind my left shoulder here. So we took DeAndre number 1, and just that, Bobby. Now that was the first time in my career I been with a team that had the number 1 pick and being obviously somewhat responsible for it. You feel the pressure, and it's just different, right? The national media interest, things like that, than if you're picking 13th, where Devin Booker, really anywhere else. So that, and then once you get past number 1. Okay, now we have Booker, who we think is going to be a star in the backcourt. We think we have Ayton, who we think really complements Booker well in the front court with his rebounding, defensive potential, ability to protect the rim defensively in time, and then also put pressure on the rim offensively. Well, who's the ideal guy to fit between them on the wing? Who's the ideal guy to fit between them? So Mikal Bridges really stood out throughout the process for us. We thought there was a pretty significant gap, at least in terms of our evaluation, from the players in that, kind of mid-lottery range, I would say, to where we were picking at 16. So the Bridges deal was very unique in that Philadelphia drafted Bridges, who, as you know, is from the Philadelphia area and played and won national championships at Villanova. They drafted him, Bobby, with the intention of keeping him. The way that deal worked was, I said, look, we're coming back at 16. It's only, I guess, a 6 picks difference on paper, but as you know, that gap in terms of the actual value, and it's all perception at that point, but can be pretty different. I said, we give you significant value because Bridges was not the only guy, but one of the guys we were targeting. So let's talk again closer to 16, and we'll see if he can strike a deal. And sure enough, that's what happened. I think we re-engaged with Philly, the 14th or 15th pick, somewhere in that range. Again, we didn't love anybody who was available in the 16 range. So the deal was, to give up an unprotected first, which is a risk, and the 16th pick, which turned out to be Zaire Smith, that was taken by us, but selected for Philadelphia. For Bridges, and this worked out well. I'm certainly hoping Bridges gets named an All-Star. I think he's right on the borderline in a tough Western Conference. But yeah, that's how that went down. And unfortunately, I didn't get to see DeAndre Ayton or Mikal Bridges play a regular season game. I was let go in the preseason that year, but certainly happy to see the team do so well. And those 3 guys who I have relationships with, Booker, Bridges, and Ayton in particular, be big contributors for the Suns.
And that's one of the more unique trades, just because usually when you pick, if you're doing a draft night trade, usually what happens is you're picking for somebody else. And for them to pick him and then kind of re-engage, right? And as far as, hey, they must have saw something in Zaire Smith. He might have been a high on their board where they say, you know what, kind of equal value. And we get something else, which was that Miami pick. It's a kind of a unique way, because not all trades happen that way. And, Phoenix certainly has a really good player that has a really good role there. I want to talk a little bit about the trade deadline and not who will get traded and the names that are, being thrown around, but kind of the process behind it. The one line I always use is kind of that roster building it's a humbling experience, right? Like who you draft or trade or sign, like looks good at the time. And then you throw them out there and it's like, whoa, maybe that doesn't work out. And it's kind of a 2-part question. The first part is that how hard is it to make an in-season trade?
It's very difficult. And I think that's one of the things that's not discussed enough is people, if you get a guy in season, you can't say, well, remember in preseason when this happened, or in training camp when we did this, or remember this sideline or baseline out of bounds play we put in. The guy, I was on a different team. I don't remember that. So it's like trying to help a student cram for a test, trying to help that player get up to speed as much as possible. I think some of the veteran guys who've been around are able to pick up some of the concepts a lot quicker, but it is difficult. No question about it. Not only in terms of, what are we trying to do as a team offensively and defensively, but teammates' tendencies, where guys like the ball, what are their strengths and weaknesses on the court. I think that's a little bit different when you're an opponent versus when you're playing with a player in terms of, the study and knowledge of that player. So there are a lot of factors to it. There's less practice time, I think, than ever right now in the NBA, Bobby, because of COVID and the protocols and players coming and going. So yeah, I'll be very interested to watch, see what happens at the deadline. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't think enough people, really discuss that. The history of trade deadline moves is generally underwhelming from a short-term impact standpoint. Over time, it can pan out. And I think one that's even less overwhelming or less impressive is, the buyout history, which is maybe for another show. But, it's something where we'll cover it. You for ESPN, me for NBA TV next week. And but generally speaking, I think the teams that do well are the ones that already have their core in place. They have continuity, and they don't have to make a big deadline move, because usually, again, that takes time to integrate a new player and to see the team benefit as a result of the move.
Well, and that's my other question for you, is that short-term short-term impact versus big picture approach. And we all kind of operate on this, 3-year window or 4-year window, where we're not always just focusing about now, but how does it impact you next offseason and the following years? And if you're a playoff team, and you can acquire a player that can help now, but will have either he's a free agent in the offseason, or you're going to have to give up like multiple draft picks. Like, how do you kind of weigh that balancing act there?
Is, each ownership group is different. I think that's where ownership is more important and more impactful than anywhere else, because now we're not talking about, the game tonight or even next month, maybe not even next year. We might be looking 2-3 years from now. So having an ownership say, yeah, we're going to be patient with a rebuild, or, we need to win now, whatever win means, right? In terms of try to compete for a championship, try to make the playoffs. Obviously, there are financial factors as well. And then, frankly, part of the calculation as an executive, as you know, Bobby, is if we go down, if we trade veteran players and players today for future assets, draft picks, young players who will take a while to develop, will we be around to see it through? And that is human nature. That's something that people aren't comfortable really discussing publicly for obvious reasons. But that is human nature. I mean, these jobs, especially on the coaching side, turn over very often. So those are all, I think, the internal debates. And, I think what owners should do, my experience, not many of them actually do it this way, is say, look, you have X number of years, Bobby Marks, Ryan McDonough, here's the budget, here are the parameters. We will judge you over time. As you know, Bobby, what tends to happen is emotion gets in the way. Losses pile up, injuries pile up. There's some, friction, and then the timeline where you thought you might have a multi-year timeline at one point. That timeline gets significantly compressed, and what's happening today matters a lot more than what may happen years from now. So that is the challenge for front offices, and that's why I think, frankly, that the organizations that have had a lot of success over time are the ones that are more stable, because they know that their job is to do what's in the best interest of the franchise, and that's whether it impacts the franchise today, tomorrow, or 3 years from now. If like I look at Miami, I look at San Antonio, those guys do what's best for the franchise and have done what's best for the franchise. I think the reason for that is not only because of how well they've done in the past, but they realize they're likely to be there in the future. So they want to do the right thing for the team.
I mean, you hit it right in the head. I mean, even just going back to my days in Brooklyn, it's, hey, when we made the Pierce Garnett trade, we all had a year left on our contract. Right. Yep. So now you're balancing. And what I've learned being out for 5 or 6 years is that what you have to do, what's the best interest of the organization, not what's the best interest of yourself. But at the time, when you have 2 kids at home and they're little and you've got a year left and you're trying to get that next contract, because you have ownership saying, we're going to Brooklyn and we need a win now team right now. All right, I will give you a win now team. Yeah. But I want 4 years, or I want 5 years to kind of see this through. And we didn't get that. We got 2 years, but it's tough. And I think that's what you hit it right in the head. Like Miami, teams like that are willing to, it's a long process. It's not like they don't operate in like a 1 year window, as you mentioned there.
Right. And so if that is the case, which it certainly is in Miami, then their top evaluators, Andy Ellisberg, Adam Simon, Chet Kammerer, know what Eric Spoelstra and Pat Riley want, and they have history together, and can not only evaluate the right players, which they do, in my opinion, better than anybody in the league, but put those players in a position to be successful and effective in a system that's proven over time, right? So Miami's got to figure it out in terms of the, now they have elite people in those roles, don't get me wrong, but in terms of the stability, I think, that organization, maybe San Antonio in that top 2, that they really benefit from it. But I mean, look, going back to what we did in Phoenix, Bobby, the first year we won 48 games. The second year we started out 28-20. I think through the first year and a half, we had a top 10 record in the NBA, somewhere right around there, which the team we inherited finished last in the Western Conference. And I only bring it up because in the last 3.5 years, I think we had the worst record in the league, even worse than the trust the process 76ers. And that was brutal. But we felt it was the right thing for the franchise. You realize you're probably not going to get to see it all the way through to the end. But to the fact that the team's playing well, I take pride in that. Okay, like I didn't get to see it through. Other guys on my staff let go. I still think we did the right thing. Now, certainly there are individual decisions we could have made that were better. There's no question about that. That's always the case, as you know, but it's about doing what's right for the franchise. And I think and hope that over time, if you do that, people will, appreciate and respect the work that you did at your previous stop.
People always see, on trade deadline or leading up, a Woj tweet, right? A Woj bomb, so-and-so gets traded, and they think like it happened in like 15 minutes, right? Like that doesn't happen. Like the trade dialogue, either sometimes it starts in the off season, sometimes it's, you're checking in during the regular season, teams are kind of evaluating. Walk me kind of through the process when you get a call from a team, you're interested in that player, or vice versa, you're calling them and there's some dialogue, you feel like we can get something done here. Walk me through as far as the next step, as far as getting your own people involved, whether it be your cap guys, your personnel, your coaches, medical, ownership, kind of all those different groups when you think you've got something that potentially can get done there.
Really good question. And it's a very delicate balancing act because, as you know, especially in the social media age we live in, Bobby, if something goes online and the players, as you know, especially the younger players, tend to always be on their phone. They're very connected to social media. If something gets online and gets out about your franchise before you want it out, it can have a detrimental and negative impact. So I think that's always the challenge. First and foremost, as an executive, it's how much do I trust the person on the other end of this call, to keep what we discuss in confidence. You and I had a number of conversations over the years. It never went anywhere. Ideally, from a front office standpoint, Woj wouldn't be as good as its job. Everything would just get released by the team on the press release. The opposite is true. I think Adrian has everybody in the league's phone tapped and just, gets everything, which makes him a Hall of Famer at his job, but makes the job more difficult at times. So I bring it up because first and foremost, it's trust with the other team, especially, Bobby, as you know, if you're talking about top of the roster, star players or, elite prospects, things like that. You do not want that out there, especially before it's time to potentially do a deal. And then internally for me, there were different kind of checkpoints and orders. First and foremost, it's your inner circle in the front office. Okay, let's pull the analytical reports, the intel reports. Now let's get the team doctor and trainer involved with the medical. Let's get ownership of approval, at least pre-approval of, hey, here are the parameters of what were you thinking about? Because as you know, Bobby, it doesn't work where you go to an owner and say, here's what we're going to do. And the owner says, go ahead. That's not the way it works in the NBA and 99.9% of the time. So you do have to prep the owner for that. And different owners have different levels of involvement. Even with the two franchises I work for in Boston and Phoenix, they were very different in terms of how ownership approached it. So then for me, the final step usually is the coaching staff. It's different in the pre-draft. In the draft process, the coaches can be more involved. But when you're talking about players on their roster who they're coaching, maybe even that night going out, that is different. So it was, the way I would do it is, here are the type of players we're looking at. Here are maybe some specific players. And then you'd go to the coaching staff when it's more real and more tangible. In the offseason, I think it's a little different. It's a little more relaxed, Bobby. But as you know, in season, sometimes if you trade a key rotational player out, the coaches, you're worried you're going to get fought tooth and nail just to get out of the room and make the call, because the coach does not want to part with that player. He's going to help him potentially win a game that night. And especially if he's going out for a draft pick or a young player, is not going to help him at all in the short term. There can be some friction and tension there as well.
Well, and that's why you didn't see Golden State make any trades during the regular season during those years where they were, really good. Same with San Antonio. San Antonio rarely made a trade, during the regular season, and it doesn't happen. But going back to your ownership, when I first started in New Jersey, we had a group called Sea Caucus 7, and there were 7 owners. They all had 8 or 9%. And what would happen is Willis Reed was our general manager. What would happen, we'd have a trade that we were thinking about doing. We would have to call this group and they would have to vote on it. And like, if this happened nowadays, like trades would never happen. And so if we call them at night, like, okay, we'll get back to you like tomorrow. And they all had to kind of get on a conference call and vote on it. And it was probably one of the most craziest experiences. And you mentioned about social media and Woj, and there was a thing called Lotus Notes, where basically it was a computer and it would spit out transactions, and you would go in a room and, okay, this is who got traded today. This is who got signed. And there was no social media in 1996. And it's a total different ball game. And I want to talk to you about the social media, because it is, I mean, it's out there, right? Twitter, news breakers, we see names speculated, and probably 98% of these guys won't even be traded when we get to the 10th. But how did you handle it when you saw some of your players in trade rumors, possibly going to another team in season? How would you handle that with your guys, your own players, as far as talking with them?
Yeah, it's very difficult, and teams do handle it very differently, as you know. In fact, I was interviewed, I think a year or two ago, for an article about the Indiana Pacers, and some friends of ours who work there, as you know, Kevin Pritchard and Chad Buchanan, they tell their guys a lot, their players a lot, like, hey, we're talking to other teams about you. I give them a lot of credit for that. I don't think that's easy. That's not the way we did it in Phoenix or Boston, certainly not to that extent. One other story that doesn't involve me directly, Bobby, but that I really learned a lot from and appreciated, was when Al Jefferson's name was on the trade block, when Al was a young rising player, when we were in the Celtics front office. Danny Ainge went to Al and said, look, I'm not trying to trade you, but if I can get Kevin Garnett or Tim Duncan, I will trade you. And I think Al was like, oh, he's not getting one of those guys. Those guys are, going. And so, but I think with Danny, that helped build credibility, not just with Al Jefferson, who ended up as the key part of the Kevin Garnett deal going to Minnesota, but with the other players, like, okay, he told him he may trade him. I don't think Al thought it would actually ever happen, that he would be valued to the level where, two of the best big men of all time would potentially be in play for him. And obviously Duncan never was, and Garnett did get traded to Boston. But so I think for me, the one thing you can never do as an executive is lie. You can't lie, right? So that's why I was probably more guarded in terms of, hey, look, those are rumors. We'll let you know. You'll hear directly from us if something happens. The challenge is, again, getting back to our guy Woj. He's so good and so fast that sometimes he gets it and you say, oh, shoot, I'm just about to call the player or his agent, just about to let him know, and it's out there. So that is the challenge. I always tried to be fair and direct. Say, look, you'll hear it from us first. We'll make every effort to let you know first. If with an agent, I think I'd be a little more open than with a player directly, because I don't want the player to be distracted. But again, that trust and relationship with the agent comes into, okay, if I'm going to shoot this guy straight, which I always try to do, how is he going to deliver the message to his client? Is he going to be able to help kind of manage this, regardless of whether the guy gets traded or not? So that's kind of how I did it. But Bobby, it's really hard. I don't think there's a perfect way to do it. And that's why I think some teams, just tell the player when they get traded. And I think where teams really screw up now is they don't even tell the player. They just hear it on social media with no communication. I would not recommend that. But on the other end of the spectrum, I don't think you can be so far out there. We're telling, every guy, anytime he's even mentioned as a potential piece of a trade, I don't think you can do that too, because just about everybody, other than maybe the elite 1% of megastars at the top of the league, gets discussed in trades in some form or fashion. So I think there's a happy medium. But again, for me, it always comes back to honesty. Be honest, be direct, and try to let the player know first if you're going to do a deal.
I have one more question before we wrap up here. So you've been out of the league for about a little over 3 years, and now you're all over the media world. How has the transition for you been, removing yourself from the front office, working in a front office for a long time, to working on the media side, as far as when you started with maybe some of the challenges and the rewards that you've kind of taken from this, and just how you've grown over the last 3 years here?
Yeah, really good question, Bobby. When everything went down with the Suns, it was in the 2018 preseason. I took some time with the family to decompress after 15 years of doing it, straight at a relatively high level. And then, I wanted to get back into it. So that's where I started with Sirius XM, NBA radio, and that kind of helped launch the broadcasting I'm doing now. I also did that, kind of part-time, because I went and visited, I think, 5 or 6 different NBA clubs. And as you know, when you're with the New Jersey / Brooklyn Nets or the Boston Celtics and Phoenix Suns, teams aren't opening the door saying, here's what we're doing, Bobby and Ryan. In fact, you and I were in Utah together a couple of years ago in Salt Lake, and really to see, especially what some of the better organizations do, I learned a lot. I gathered a lot of information. I think the media piece of it, Bobby, for me, and I'm a little bit unique because I grew up in a media family, but I think generally it's beneficial for people in any walk of life, especially in sports, to do different jobs, because if you do different jobs, you realize what people are trying to accomplish whose job is different than yours, right? So on the team side, I bring it up because, as you know, on the team side, in some ways, Bobby, it would be easiest if the media didn't exist, right? If you had to do no media and just worried about your team, and if a media member called you, say, just watch the game that tonight we're playing on TNT, like that would be easiest. But that's not what's best for the league, and that's certainly not what's best for the media, and in terms of not only you individually but the franchise. So I think finding that mutual level of respect, of balance, of trust. To be honest with you, it all comes back to trust and relationships for me. Here's what the folks in the media side are trying to accomplish. Here's what folks in the team side are trying to accomplish. Yes, sometimes they're different, and there is conflict at times, but just kind of a mutual respect. And how can you guys, respectfully help each other get what you each want to have accomplished? I think that's what I've taken away from it, and that's what I think I'll do a little bit differently if and potentially when I'm back with an NBA team.
Well, you certainly deserve to be back with an NBA team. I think your track record in Phoenix and what you were able to accomplish in Boston, winning an NBA championship there, getting to two NBA finals. There's a lot of good history there, and I want to thank you. Thank you for coming on the front office, giving your words of wisdom as far as kind of pull the curtain back a little bit about what goes on the week of the trade deadline. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Bobby. You and I have known each other a long time, and it's always great to be on with you. And I'm really glad you're doing the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN Plus.